Thank you, and thanks for having me, EDF, and this event. It's been really tremendous to see everyone's faces and the engagement level. I think this conversation has been long overdue, and you can tell by how excited everyone is to discuss the issues, and so thanks again to the hosts. I'm going to begin by giving a general answer to the question presented to the panel by introducing some core values or concepts I use to evaluate policy solutions and interventions in this space. And then I'll talk about an exciting legislative development that I think answers those core values and really speaks to those principles. So first core value, right, is I'm acutely aware of the climate crisis. I think everyone in the room is, but if the March IPCC report didn't make clear, we need deep and fast reductions in methane if we have a chance of meeting the global warming targets. And so in this context, that really means that enteric methane inhibiting products need to work. They need to work really well, and they need to be on the market very, very soon. So second core value here is safety. I am a mom. My 4-year-old daughter drinks a ton of milk, and because she only eats beige things, that is great. I buy a lot of it. I feel like sometimes I am supporting the California organic dairy industry, and I'm happy about that. It's wonderful. And safety is my primary concern with her, right? If I am worried that there is something risky in her food, God forbid there is a carcinogen, potentially in her milk and meat, I'm gonna find an alternative. And both of those are true. Both of those have to be true. For policy and for products in this space, we really need them to work. We need them to be on the market now, and they have to be very safe for consumers. Turns out, I am a pretty typical consumer. EDF in 2022 commissioned a study with GlobeScan, the market research firm, to evaluate consumer perceptions of various enteric methane interventions. We are still working with them to finalize the analysis and to dig into some of the sort of granular details for these consumer segments. But I can give you some top-line takeaways that I think are going to be really important to kind of frame this discussion. So first takeaway is that consumers have varying perceptions of the safety and relative risk for interventions. And shocking for anyone who has been paying attention to public health in the last 3 years, those consumer perceptions of risk have very little to do with the data on the interventions, right? I'll just share very, very broadly, consumers tended to think synthetic products and drugs were the most risky. So second big takeaway, in order to accept the enteric methane inhibiting products into their diet to purchase them, the products really have to work. Consumers want to see that they really drove emission reductions. They didn't want, 2 or 3%, 10%. They really want to see very effective products if they're going to buy them. And this is important because consumers matter to driving down emission reductions, right? Just as important as the science and innovation in developing these interventions, in order to achieve really deep methane reductions in the livestock space, we need consumers to accept them, to buy them. And we need that in a very, very significant capacity, right? This needs to be most consumers that are willing to buy milk and meat from animals that have been treated for enteric methane reductions. So consumers are really key to driving down emissions just as much as the science and the interventions themselves. So we have a situation where consumers are skeptical of some of our leading interventions, and we really need them to drive down methane emissions. Who do they trust? They trust farmers and producers, they trust US government regulators, and they trust scientists. And I have to say, because I respect my CDFA panelists so much, I think we can read this in a couple ways. The first is that some of the questions were US government regulators versus regulators in other jurisdictions. So would the consumers be satisfied with approvals from other jurisdictions? And the answer is resoundingly like, no way, right? US government regulators. The second is really that our survey included consumers from the entire US, not just California. I'm sure that the California constituents really trust their regulators also. But we're looking at a national survey. And we do have a federal regulatory entity that has been delegated the authority to provide safety and efficacy or intended use evaluations for products in this space. And delighted that Dave is on the panel. Prepared a little of this without knowing that we would have the expert in the room. So Dave, bear with me. I'm going to steal your thunder a little bit and kind of let you all know that FDA is acutely aware of this sort of dual challenge, right? The need for efficient, speedy approvals of enteric methane inhibiting products and the deep, deep need we have for safety in the space for consumer trust. And in October, they held a listening session in which they evaluated, over 100 comments from stakeholders, providing discrete solutions and providing, discrete mandates, I think, to solve this issue. Based on those comments, FDA is working with 3 senators, Senator Baldwin, Bennett, and Marshall, to propose legislation providing more clarity on how enteric inhibiting products would be treated, other products as well, but would provide clarity in this space. So there is draft legislative language undergoing sort of finalization by the Senate offices. The plan is to introduce it for inclusion in a DUFA reauthorization, hopefully this year, hopefully this summer, but that does depend on many other factors out of our control. To just very briefly introduce the bones of this legislation, it would amend Section 201 of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act to add a definition of zootechnical animal food substances. Those products have to be added to the food and water of animals and have an intended or have an effect in the animal GI only. They can make 3 basic claims. The first is that they will affect the emissions from the animal or its waste. The second is that it would reduce pathogens of human health significance in the target animal. The third would be products that alter the animal gut microbiome. And then there's sort of a catch-all, right? So, and additional claims as provided by the Secretary in future rulemakings. These new zootechnical animal food substances would be deemed by FDA for regulatory purposes as food additives. That is an important distinction, right, from drugs or feed ingredients that would go through different regulatory pathways. The proposed legislation states very clearly that these products would go through the food additive petition process and would need to be approved by FDA before entering interstate commerce and being marketed as such. There are a few outstanding issues debated right now as the senators work to finalize language. The first is regarding claims that are specifically excluded from this new zootechnical category. The FDA draft language, the working language right now, would exclude things like ionophores, hormones, and drugs. There's some discussion around whether all of those are appropriate or there should be additional exclusions. Another outstanding issue is really the treatment of products that have already been approved by FDA for some other claims. If a product has already gone through the food additive petition, for example, provided information on safety, there should be, hopefully, a pathway for those products to make environmental claims or gut microbiome claims or pathogen claims without having to go to the start of the line. And then the last outstanding issue that is, I can't underscore the importance enough, is to provide the agency with enough funding to add capacity to deal with the influx of food additive petitions for zootechnical animal products. EDF heard over and over and over again in stakeholder conversations, in dialogue with many of you here, that this is not just a regulatory issue, this is a capacity issue. It is not just a tweak of legislative language or regulatory approach that is going to really speed approvals. It really depends on the submission packages and FDA's capacity, just personnel, to deal with this. And so seeking appropriate funding for CVM and other regulatory entities who will deal with this should be top of mind for everyone in the room who wants to see products on the market. And we have Dave here on the panel to really get into the details of what a food additive petition will look like. And I can say that because of that provision and that pathway, EDF is strongly endorsing for a couple reasons, right? This leverages an existing regulatory pathway. The FAP process already exists. We don't need to go through a long regulatory process. We can start using it now. It is broadly consistent with other jurisdictions. The EU has a zootechnical category, and Canada has a gut microbiome category. So in general, we are sort of consistent with our other jurisdictions that are also seeking a efficient way to get enteric methane-emitting products on the market. I think that will benefit innovators, benefit companies that are seeking broad markets for their products. And then third, this pathway really nails that balance, that dual balance of speed and safety. And I am really excited to hear Dave and others discuss it further. Thanks.
Okay, so next we're going to welcome Leah Wilkinson. She is the American Feed Industry Association's Vice President of Public Policy and Education. Wilkinson joined AFIA in 2010. She interacts with state legislators, feed regulatory agencies in the Western U.S., the Association of Animal Feed Control Officials, and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. She also works with AFIA Feed Regulatory Ingredient Approvals Definition and Aquaculture Committees, and serves as the chair of the International Feed Industry Federation's Regulatory International Cooperation. Wow, that is a really long. And so we will welcome her. You guys heard from her yesterday, and I'm sure she has some great insight on this.
Thank you for the opportunity again today, Holly, for kicking that off. So I think you gave a good overview and some of the same things that I was going to say about why we, as an association, have been engaged in this and what's put upon our members to be able to bring products to the market. So I think we all share that common goal of making sure that the products are safe for humans, are safe for our animals, right, and that they work. And that's ultimately the responsibility of the manufacturer and the developer putting that product onto the market. That is the statutory requirement that we have at a state and a federal level, that the product is safe for its intended use. And we also have to have the labeling aspects of that, that it has to be truthful and not misleading. And so those are the standards that we have to operate under on a day-to-day basis. And from an association perspective, we saw that this was an emerging category of need from our customers, but knew that there were regulatory challenges. And there are many people in this room that called me up and asked the question, so-and-so told me that I can't put this in my feed, and they told me to call you, and you would tell me why. And many of you were not happy with the answer that I probably gave you, but got to, I think, the conversation that we all needed to have in order to put the industry and producers in the right space regarding these products. And so I apologize having to have those hard conversations with you, but knowing where the feed manufacturer is and the legal responsibilities that they are under and is an important part of the conversation too. So AFIA had been working decades ago trying to get some changes in the policy interpretation from FDA. We dropped it for many reasons, but brought it back up again in 2020, and that's when we made an ask of the Center for Veterinary Medicine to modernize that policy and find a pathway that these products could be regulated as feeds, because we saw that with the interpretation that they were drugs, products just weren't either being discovered. Nobody was looking for it because they knew they could not make that insurmountable regulatory hurdle of these products being animal drugs. So we made that ask. CVM has done their work. You've seen and heard from Holly now of kind of where we are in that pathway. We're still, from an association perspective, reviewing that language. We haven't had it as long as CVM had it to write it, and asking lots of questions for how that would be interpreted and used. And I don't think there's necessarily so much of a question on the emissions piece, but more on the microbiome and a little bit on the food safety side. And so we're still going through that. We want to see a pathway forward, though, that these products are feeds and regulated as such, and that we can get them to market. So I'll leave that there, and then I'm sure there'll be lots of questions.
Thank you, Leah. Now I'm going to introduce Jenna Leal, is the program manager for the several programs in the Division of Inspection Services at CDFA, including the Commercial Feed Regulatory Program, Safe Animal Feed Education Program, Livestock Drugs Program, and the Antimicrobial Use and Stewardship Program. Throughout her career at CDFA, Jenna has been involved in several national committees, including the U.S. FDA's FSMA curriculum development for state regulators, the National Association of Secretary Departments of Agriculture, FSMA and Preventative Controls Framework curriculum development, and has been a committee member and participant in numerous AFCO meetings and committees. Of her many job requirements, she most enjoys leading her excellent team, collaborating with industry and regulators from around North America, as well as developing and executing real solutions for the benefit and longevity of the regulated industry.
Do I just push the green button forward? Okay. Thanks, Rochelle. I'll get into this first slide a little bit later, but at times it does feel like the gold rush, and I think Dr. Kabrab mentioned it earlier, the Wild West. So I will touch on that later, but I thought that was kind of appropriate for the discussions we're having today. Again, Rochelle touched on this slightly, but there are several programs under the umbrella of the Commercial Feed Regulatory Program. That is our Livestock Drugs Program, where we work on label review, compliance for not only registered products online and distributed in brick and mortar buildings, and we also perform livestock drug inspections at retailers across California. Within that also is our Antimicrobial Use and Stewardship Program, our co-program manager that oversees all surveys and studies, and stewardship is over Edie Marshall, Dr. Edie Marshall. You heard from her briefly yesterday. I focus only on the regulated use portion, which is compliance for VFD drugs, the use of and manufacturing of those drugs in our commercial feed mills, as well as data collection for those veterinary feed directives. we pass that information over, and where surveys and studies and stewardship can utilize that information for their outreach and education purposes. And then, of course, we have our parent program, the Commercial Feed Regulatory Program, and that's really the focus of today's discussion. We are primarily focused on FSMA compliance, Food Safety Modernization Act. We've been talking about this since 2011, and actually, if nothing else, we've reiterated how important food safety is today. I think we've all kind of have that ingrained, but really, FSMA is the foundation of our robust food safety system. It was passed in 2011, and we've been working and dedicated to this as an industry and producers across California and as a regulatory body for the past decade plus. And so our sampling, our inspections, they're all geared towards food safety. We have staff located throughout the state who are performing very complex inspections, and I know we have some feed manufacturers in here who can attest to those very complex and sometimes burdensome inspections to ensure food safety across California feed mills. We also work on label compliance. Label compliance and truthful labeling claims are very important to the commercial feed program, and they're important to the consumers of our feed products. We also recently, and with the help of our technical advisory subcommittee and our feed board, passed regulations, drafted regulations, which then were adopted into the program regarding incentivization of the use of byproducts, upcycling. Dave Eisen is on our technical advisory subcommittee. He spoke to that earlier. But really what this did was it transformed our data collection to be able to more accurately identify and quantify the byproduct usage in California through the program, as well as incentivize the use and diversion of byproducts that have been a long-standing staple in our diet of ruminant animals in California. But now we can really quantify those numbers, which is so exciting, and it's helpful to the industry. And it will be helpful for this discussion as well. And then, of course, Rochelle touched on it, not just me, but my entire team is dedicated to continued collaboration with our federal and association partners. We sit on various committees through AFCO and different work groups across the feed industry sector. And so that collaboration is very important. This is not a California-centric issue, and many of our issues are not. And so we rely on these federal relationships across state lines. I was just on the phone with the Office of the Texas State Chemist yesterday. We talk to each other all the time. And so it's really important to have associations such as AFCO and others that bring us regulators together in order to make sound policy decisions. An important program that I didn't mention but also sits under that parent program of the feed program is our SAFE program. In 2005, our feed industry, being as forward-thinking and innovative and solution-oriented as they are, knew that with feed safety being the top of mind, that we needed to have a first of its kind back in 2005, and I still don't know if any other feed program has it in the nation, Safe Animal Feed Education Program. A portion of the funds from our commercial feed regulatory program, which is all industry funded through tonnage tax and licensing, a small portion of these funds that are collected to run our program fund our SAFE program. This is a program that is strictly dedicated to helping feed manufacturers comply with the many rules and regulations that are out there and develop educational materials for the regulated industry, as well as conduct research studies on new, innovative, and sometimes unapproved ingredients that need research. And so our task helps us with identifying priorities of those research funding dollars. It's a very small amount of money compared to what we've been talking about, very small projects, but important work. Some of the some of the operations of the SAFE program, like I said, outreach, education, and research, but these are some of the lists of things that we're doing in this space. I'll go through this pretty quickly. We also publish several annual reports, and so here is a list of those that we are currently publishing. Here is a breakdown, and I believe someone had this in their slides yesterday, but of the tonnage byproducts. Again, the new tonnage incentivization and byproduct data collection that we're doing is really helping us tell this story. And so this is just a breakdown. The next couple of slides are really just breakdowns of data that we've been able to collect over the last couple years. We've also published several educational and outreach materials and infographics that will help folks comply and utilize in their many discussions on these type of topics. Our annual tonnage report, so just under 24 million tons was reported to the program. That's total tons of finished feed sold in California. That is what is funding our program. This is a breakdown of the various types of feed products that were within that just under 24 million tons. And here is the intended species. We have a wide variety of species that we feed, but you will see that dairy cattle and beef cattle, as well as multiple species, which we're still working on refining this data collection, and we will be working on that multiple species portion of the pie to really get that more specific. But you'll see that, our ruminants make up a large portion of the tonnage that is reported and what our program is funded with. I wanted to bring this to everybody's attention too. We, actually Erica in the back, she develops this quarterly feed update. We have this posted and it goes out through our listservs. This is a great resource. There have been our hemp study that was conducted. We put some information on this quarterly feed update from here. We do an annual mycotoxin study that we publish on our quarterly update. Anything that the program is working on, this was an ask by our board, and it is one of those many ways that the program is very transparent with our regulated industry. This quarterly feed update is a great resource for our regulated industry, but I think it'll be a great resource for many others as well, and I would encourage everyone in the room to take a look at them. So moving on to why we're all in the room today, and I put up this slide because I think we're all feeling it, and I just want to point out that where else can you find three fabulous redheads on one panel? Nowhere. I mean, we all knew this was great, but this is really great. So anyway, nonetheless, at times this does seem like the California gold rush. You maybe represent one company, but everyone that's going to Leah for guidance also comes to us and says, we want to be able to sell our product in California. What can we do? What can we do? And unfortunately, though we are all very nice, we have to say you can't. And that's hard. And it's hard to be the backstop. I will tell you, it's not easy. However, the difference between the gold rush of 1849 and today is that we have a robust federal food safety system in place that exists that ensures food safety across the nation. Our milk and our meat don't stay within California borders. And so having those approvals centric and specific to California, it really won't do any good. And so we need to be able to continue the collaboration and working with our federal partners to ensure that these types of approvals are on a federal level, and we will support that 100%. The other thing that I think is important to mention, and it was discussed in the previous panel, is the approval is just one aspect. The protocols need to be in place for that approved product in order to count. And so I think that with what I heard at the last panel, that's really helpful information because every single person in this room, as Dr. Mitloehner has stated earlier, we are all part of that solution. And the folks in this room can help drive this forward. And we are all solution oriented. And so I think we have the right group in this room to help, make progress in this space. We all know, I don't need to reiterate this, but we all know that, we have some lofty goals. So what is our commitment? Our commitment is food and feed safety is paramount within the regulatory feed program, and I think we've really hounded that into the ground. But you also have the program's commitment to continue collaboration with our federal and state sister agencies in order to move the needle on this and move forward in a responsible manner. We also need to work with our nutritionists who are formulating these diets on farm, and in many cases are key to gathering the data that's needed for what we're talking about here, as well as producers. Producers are really smart, innovative, responsible folks. They need to have a seat at this table and their voices heard. We also understand in our feed industry that we need an emission reduction plan, and so we are committed to facilitating that with our commercial feed industry and with our partners. We need to stay engaged with academia, and we will do that. The Meet the Call from that was referenced many times, that paper that was published, those are the types of things that we need to focus in on. Really sound science, and we're committed to staying engaged with academia to do so. And our SAFE program will continue to develop outreach and educational tools for our producers, nutritionists, and anyone else that we think is a priority in this space to help progress move forward. So thank you for your time.
All right, thank you. Now we're going to shift and go to the food safety side with Dr. Stephen Beam. Dr. Beam holds a PhD in animal science from Cornell University and has been with CDFA for 24 years, serving in both the Division of Inspection Services and the Division of Animal Health and Food Safety Services. He was appointed as chief of the Milk and Dairy Food Safety Branch in 2004, where he continues to manage all aspects of the statewide food safety inspection program from farm to table for milk and milk products. Dr. Beam represents California at the National Conference on Interstate Milk Shipments, where he recently completed 10 years as the chairman of the executive board, presiding over 4 national meetings and to revise the FDA pasteurized milk ordinance. He also serves as the NCIM, that's a really long acronym. Why do people keep doing this to me? Scientific Advisory Committee for reviewing potential science-based changes to national grade A milk safety requirements.
Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Yesterday, if anything, I think it showed all of us how complicated and hard this challenge is before us. And there's nothing like, convening a regulatory panel to infuse light and optimism into all of you today. So, but it is an important topic, and what I hope to do today is talk about Milk and Dairy Food Safety Branch and CDFA, and where do we fit into this whole process. Because I'm not sure that everyone fully appreciates how much milk is regulated from a food safety side. I know we've talked a lot about safety, and I'm going to kind of keep beating that drum here as part of my segment here. But in terms of where we fit into CDFA organizationally, the Milk and Dairy Food Safety Branch is part of the Animal Health and Food Safety Services Division. And so Dr. Annette Jones, the state veterinarian, is the director of that division, and so I report to her. And we are one of several branches and programs within the division that work together to ensure food safety in very much a one health mentality. Human health, animal health, the environment, they're all connected, and to make sure that we all are living in a world where animals are healthy and free of disease, and people have safe food and have a healthy life. And so we are positioned and housed together within the department to work together and to collaborate programmatically with the animal health branch, that works on animal disease. And then we have my branch that I oversee that inspects dairy farms and milk processors, the entire distribution system in the state. And of course, we have the antimicrobial use and stewardship program that Jenna mentioned is actually housed in Animal Health and Food Safety Services. And we have a new animal care program that is working largely on animal confinement regulation issues, but has some broader targets to get involved in the future. And so I know we've heard this before, but it's not just about feeding cows, it's about producing food. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in the technical aspects, and we're on this locomotive of moving towards this challenge that we all want to meet in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and having climate-smart agriculture, which CDFA fully supports and is behind. But we also have to remember that as that train is chugging down the track, we have two things we always have to be considering. We have the efficacy side and the science behind what works, and then we have that other rail, which is safety, consumer acceptance, and we can't proceed without both of those. Otherwise, this thing's going to derail, and we're not going to get to where we want to be with respect to impacting the climate and having that smart agriculture that we've been talking about. So officially, the Milk and Dairy Food Safety Branch, we have a mission to ensure that milk and milk products are safe and wholesome and they're properly labeled. It's a pretty fundamental food safety mission that we try to uphold every day. Just in terms of scale, I know this is a huge effort we have before us globally, but sometimes I think it's important to also remember, especially for those of you that may not be from California, just the scale of what we're looking at in this state. 13 million gallons approximately every single day comes off of dairy farms in this state. 2,000 tankers hit the road every day to be processed. It's about 19% now of the total U.S. milk supply. It was 20% for some time, but we're just under that now, largely because of increases in other states, the upper Midwest and states like Texas that are increasing their production. And so it's a challenge, and we also ship our products. That milk gets processed into products of a variety of types, and they're shipped across the country and even around the world. And you know, that scale may be challenging, but I also see it as an opportunity because there are a lot of cows here, and we want to keep the cows here. If we can come up with systems that are workable, that are practical, that are effective in terms of smart production of milk and efficient and reducing methane emissions, we want the cows to stay here to do that. We don't want farms to leave the state and animals to leave the state to go somewhere else. I think that's why we're all in this together to make it work. And it's certainly a challenge I think we can all face together. I'm not going to go over every single thing we do as a state regulatory inspection program, but I do want to say that we are truly farm to table, California Department of Food and Agriculture. We inspect at every step from cow to cup, or cow to your yogurt, or cow to your cheese, whatever it might be, we are there doing inspection work. And I like to say that the milk commodity is inspected more than any other food by far from a system standpoint. I'm not sure that the general public necessarily is aware of the level of intense inspection program that occurs for milk here and across the country. We inspect dairy farms. We inspect the milk tanker trucks that pick up the milk from the farm. We are on dairy farms, us or our county. We have some counties in California that run their farm inspection programs under our oversight 10 to 12 times a year doing regulatory work. We are in milk processing plants doing inspections at least 4 times a year, doing scored inspections. And we check every pasteurizer at least 4 times a year and make sure it's working properly. We collect samples of every product at least 8 times a year. And we also respond to consumer complaints, and we review product labels prior to the market here in California for dairy products to make sure there's no false and misleading claims. So that's all done by CDFA's Milk and Dairy Food Safety Branch. Now, the dairy farm level, we work very closely, of course, with Jenna's program on the feed side, because that's the input side that we have to make sure is safe. Early history, this is not new. It's important for everyone to understand that this has been going on for a very long time with respect to milk safety because of how important it is for preventing human illness and, of course, providing proper nutrition. So 1905 was the first time that dairy farms and milk processing plants were inspected according to a sanitary scorecard. It's been that long. It's not a new thing. It's not new government encroachment. These are long-established systems recognizing the importance of safety of milk to the consumer. So how do we do this, and what authority do we exercise? Of course, we have our state law, California Food and Agricultural Code, or California Code of Regulations, where those laws are further specified. And then we also, importantly, administer, you heard the acronym earlier, NCIMS. That's the National Conference on Interstate Milk Shipments, and that is a mouthful. And that's the national organization that helps to establish, in cooperation with FDA, all the requirements for grade A milk and milk products to be moved and acceptable from a food safety standpoint in interstate commerce. It's a key cooperative program between FDA, the states, and industry to establish those requirements. And all 50 states and the U.S. Trust Territory of Puerto Rico are involved in this. And so, and I understand that the consumers trust the government, and that's great, the U.S. government, and we work with them closely. But when it comes to milk, particularly grade A milk, the work that's done, the face that's seen on the farm, the face that's seen in the milk processing plant is largely states. States do the inspection work for milk programs across the country, and we work with FDA. FDA has an oversight, auditing, training role with the states. And even under the Food Safety Modernization Act and the Preventive Controls Rule, many states have contracts to do that work for FDA in those facilities. So hopefully that trust they have for the U.S. government it does indeed trickle down to the state folks that are doing that work. That pasteurized milk ordinance and related technical documents, that's the standard for how milk interstate commerce works for grade A milk. In California, well over 90% of the milk produced on farms is grade A. And so as Jenna was indicating, when we talk about things that will impact the safety of that milk, it impacts interstate commerce just because of the size and scale. It impacts potentially international commerce as well. We as a branch also issue certificates for export for California's dairy products that are going around the world. And those countries want certifications and attestations to safety. And so that's what we do, and we issue several thousand of those every year to over 35 different countries. And so safety is indeed paramount. I know we've heard it, and we're aware of it. It kind of tickles our ear, but I don't know that we're there operationally to make sure that that truly is paramount in how we're moving forward in this endeavor. The PMO and the National Conference on Interstate Milk Shipments in the states, we're actually under a formal memorandum of understanding with FDA to implement this program. And there are a lot of standards. We could take 10 years to go over the standards of the PMO, but what's applicable here is that there are standards for making sure that the feed supplied to dairy livestock is fit for that use, that we're not feeding something that would cause a residue in milk, that the drugs that are used on the farm are only approved drugs. And that was an issue with kind of where we are now with enteric methane reduction claims being a drug claim. That means it would be a drug used on a farm, which would mean be an unapproved drug on a farm, which would mean you have a serious compliance issue. You may or may not have an immediate safety issue, but you do have a compliance issue. And it's key for adoption. Everything we saw yesterday in terms of enteric methane reduction hinges a lot on how these additives might penetrate into the herd and be utilized. And that's just not going to happen by the big co-ops if there's some interstate commerce implications. They're not going to take that step until that's addressed. And that's why, as Jenna said, it's key that the federal government be the clearinghouse, the approving agency to make sure we get those approvals that we need for this process. And we need to work together on it. It's something that we're good at. We're able to work together as agencies, both federal and state. We are very good at working with industry. Here in California, there's a lot of work on sustainability. Dairy processors are trying to save water, they're trying to save energy, and so they look to us for assistance in terms of, well, how can we change things? Can we recycle water more? Can we clean at lower frequencies? Can we do these savings and still keep things safe when we work with them to make that happen? And I see this as just a much larger effort to address a very, very sticky problem that we have before us. But safety of consumers is paramount. It really is. And I know that I'm saying that over and over. It's just, again, because there's so much momentum and so much of a hurry to get things going, but we cannot forget that we have to make sure it's going to be safe and that consumers will accept it. John F. Kennedy is famous, of course, for saying how we were going to send someone to the moon in under 10 years, not because it was easy, but because it was hard. And we're under that same kind of challenge, but JFK never asked the consumers to face a risk at the kitchen table while that was done. And so we can't do that with this effort, but I know we can get there if we all work together. And I have this here just because this is a warning sign, it's a caution sign, it's not a stop sign, all right? We just have to be circumspect about what we're doing, work together in a science-based way, in a practical way, implement things in a way that's going to work and get us to where we need to go, because it all depends on your perspective, and lots of people are watching for different reasons, and we have to keep all of that into account. So thank you.
Shorter than you, Dr. Beam. Thankfully, Dr. Dave Edwards was here from FDA and has volunteered, he's not on your agenda, to sit on the panel because we do need to hear from FDA. Dr. Dave Edwards is the director of the Division of Animal Food Ingredients within the Office of Surveillance and Compliance at FDA's Center for Veterinary Medicine. The division regulates pre-market ingredient approvals. CVM works to protect human and animal health. Prior to joining CVM, Dr. Edwards was the director of animal biotechnology at Biotechnology Innovation Organization, or BIO, in Washington, D.C. BIO is the world's largest biotechnology trade association. He also worked on the majority professional staff of the U.S. Senate Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry. He grew up in Iowa, raised pigs, sheep, and specialty crops, and received a BS in genetics and agricultural biochemistry from Iowa State University, and his MS and PhD in animal science, breeding, and genetics at Michigan State University. He also graduated from the U.S. Federal Executive Institute.
Thanks, Rochelle, and thanks to folks for the invitation to be on this panel. I know my name's not on the list, so somehow I got invited on, and I appreciate that. All right, so I've got something to get the blood flowing a little bit for folks. All right, it's going to be a raise your hand exercise, so raise your hand if you eat. Should be probably everybody, we hope. Keep your hands up, keep your hands up. All right, now how many people came from California for this meeting? So fewer probably, I think, all right. And how many people have touched a cow in the last month? Touched a cow last month. Good, that's a good number. All right, last one, this is the hardest one. How many people know all the acronyms that we've thrown out today? No, nothing. Okay, more people touching cows than acronyms. Well, good, I'm from the government, I'm here to help. So I think as we've had an opportunity to hear today, we've talked a little bit on this panel, and we've talked some the last couple days about some of the new innovations that are coming and some of the things that can help out with not only California's goals, but really the worldwide goals in terms of this enteric methane. I want to just start, and I have a lot of acronyms here. I'll try not to use them, but if I do, stop me and I'll try to unuse them. Reminder, if something is going to be fed and going to come through to animals, either on the animal food additive side or the new animal drug side, the data and information that are needed for those are fairly similar. As far as the regulatory pathway, the things that we look at are target animal safety. So that safety to that animal itself. Is that substance safe for the animal to consume? Is it safe to utilize for the animal? And we've heard it already several times, I think, over the last day and a half. And so we know that safety is important. Secondly, and Dr. Beam over here gave a really good overview on that, is the human food safety aspects. We're talking a lot about dairy today. Dairy cows produce a lot of human food, and so it's super important for that human food to also be safe. And I know I loved the cheese that was out there yesterday, and I'm a big proponent of some of the dairy products, but also a proponent of some of the other products that come from animals. And so knowing that human food that I and my family consume is safe is important part of this aspect too. And I think we know those things. The other piece that we look at is utility, sometimes called effectiveness. So what does whatever the product do, does it actually do what it says it's going to do? And we find that that's important too, not only for people that are utilizing that, but also for a regulator who's trying to figure out exactly what that intended use is of that product. In order to look at target animal safety and the other aspects of safety and utility, we talk a lot about chemistry and manufacturing controls. Essentially, chemistry and manufacturing controls is, can you make the product in a consistent manner and you can make it safely? So it leads into how is it manufactured and how does that lead to the safety of the product? So we do look at chemistry and manufacturing controls as part of that. We also look at the environmental safety. Not only are we under some laws that say we have to look at environmental safety every time we have an action as an agency, we also want to make sure that we're not impacting the environment in a risky manner. And I know a lot of the things we're talking about here at this conference are impacting in a positive, beneficial way, but we also want to make sure that we're not negatively impacting things at the same time. So the federal regulatory system is based on intended use. And so you'll hear me say intended use a lot of times. I'll say it again, intended use. Intended use determines in the regulatory system whether something is an animal food additive or whether something is a new animal drug for those substances utilized in animals. So the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act is the statute that talks to foods, drugs, and cosmetics, as the name implies. But the part that we are talking a lot about is the pieces that have to do with foods and drugs. Now, we share the food section across human and animal food, and we do that across the Act. But we have separate regulations for animal and human food. So just as something is safe for a human doesn't necessarily mean it's safe for an animal. So when we look at substances, and we look at those in my division for everything from livestock to pets to aquaculture, et cetera, we have to look to make sure that it's safe for the animal. So we have several species we look at. We ensure that we have experts from across the realm. We've got folks that are able to look at safety, whether things are companion animals or whether things are larger size animals. And those folks help us to ensure that those animal foods are safe. And there's a few administrative differences, but just keep in mind, we've talked a lot about feed additives today as a terminology. So feed additive is not actually a terminology that appears in the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. So when we're talking about animal food additives or we're talking about new animal drugs, you may hear us say those terms, and so you have to kind of think about how those relate to what may be called out in the industry. We do have opportunities prior to coming to talk to us and actually throwing the data at us for an approval. Some of those opportunities on this pre-submission part, I know folks have been asking, especially researchers have been asking, exactly what can we do, how can we work with you prior to coming and giving you a packet to approve. We outlined these in a guidance for industry. Here I will use an acronym, GFI is what a lot of times what we'll say, so a guidance for industry, number 262. So 262 outlined a lot of the things that we can do on a pre-submission basis. And we encourage folks to come and talk to us before they put in a submission. We can help get those things all lined up that need to come into us, the data packets, the information. Within this guidance for industry 262, we also talk a lot about protocol reviews for feeding trials. Now, we've talked about protocols before. This is a little different, but protocols for feeding trials, those scientific protocols that say, I'm going to take this many animals, I'm going to feed them in these kinds of groups, I'm going to have this veterinarian look over them for safety, I'm going to have this analytical method, and those sorts of objectives. Now, I came from a background where I went to graduate school and did research trials, and when we talk about those research trials for a regulatory aspect, they may involve something that's a little bit different necessarily than a basic research trial where it's doing basic science and basic research. It may involve some of these aspects that we need to know so that we can encompass all that. So we encourage people to come talk to us about those things. In fact, we review those protocols before people run trials if that's something that they want. We try to get those turned around quickly. We know that people, when they get to the point of having a research protocol ready, that their animals are probably sitting there gaining weight and wanting people to get them on studies. So we try to get those done really quickly. The other piece we talk about in this guidance for Industry 262 is the food use authorization. So if you're feeding something that is an investigational food additive, it's not yet approved for use in that animal. And so if that meat, milk, and eggs that comes from that animal would not yet be approved to go onto the market. So a lot of the times when people are doing research, we want them to make sure that we know enough of the safety that on a temporary basis, we can offer a food use authorization so that that meat, milk, or eggs doesn't necessarily have to go to the landfill, but it can go to either animal food or to human food, dependent on what we know about the safety. Sometimes we don't yet know enough about the safety of that substance, and so those meat, milk, and eggs either need to be destroyed or provided some other aspect outside of being fed to people because we don't know the safety yet. But food use authorization allows you to take an investigational substance and maybe utilize those food, which I know is really important for researchers. Nobody wants to take and dump all the milk from a herd of cows at once, and so we work with folks on that. So our charge is to ensure manufacturers protect animal and human safety. So ensuring animal and human safety is really what we're all about. We do that in conjunction with the states. We know that that is a dual charge that we have with our state agencies, and so we really rely on each other in order to do that. My division specifically works on pre-market approvals of animal food ingredients, whether that's through the food additive petition process, whether that's through the generally recognized as safe notice evaluation process, or whether that's working with the organization called AFCO, the Association for American Feed Control Officials. I think others have talked about that. It's a joint organization with state and federal feed control officials, and they also provide an opportunity to have feed ingredients defined there within the AFCO organization. CVM serves as the technical resource. We serve as the scientific review of those ingredients as well. So we try to utilize those three pathways across our numerous scientists that we have within the division to help ensure the safety of animal and human. So, we've heard a lot about carbon markets this morning, but carbon markets are not in FDA's purview. So don't ask me about carbon markets, ask someone else about carbon markets. But do come ask us before before you put something into the food supply, before you're thinking about an approval. Getting things approved is a good way, as was mentioned earlier, that if we have it as an approval, it shows up on the federal level, or if AFCO has it in their ingredient definitions, it shows up in a place that's harmonized across all the state feed control programs. And that gives a lot of faith in the safety of that product, and it gives state regulators, as they're looking at lists of things to allow within the going to the animals, a place where they can look to make sure that we're all harmonized across. So I appreciate, again, the opportunity to be on the panel. Looking forward to questions as we have them, and thank you very much.
Our last speaker panelist is Jed Asmus. He is a dairy nutritionist with clients throughout California. His nutrition team is focused on assisting their clients in navigating disruptive markets and ever-changing business environments while maintaining healthy and prosperous herds. Jed also has been involved in numerous feed product research studies and is a member of the CDFA Feed Inspection Advisory Board.
So I know I'm the last presenter before lunch, and I watch the caffeine drain out of everybody as they sit here in the last couple talks. So we'll keep this brief and kind of get you guys the food at some point. I realized in preparing for this, I didn't do a good job of explaining what a dairy nutritionist is. We talk a lot about DVMs and veterinarians on dairies. There's about 500 plus or minus nutritionists nationwide, and we feed and help our clients feed cows. I feed about 45,000 cows in California. I touch about $200 million in feed every year, and that's not my partners. We involve ourselves and get involved and sucked into every bit of chaos that can happen on our dairy. The rain and hail you guys saw yesterday driving or going to dinner, my clients were getting their feed wet, and that affected the cows this morning. And that's the things that happen on a nutritionist. And so as we talk about enteric methane and regulations and timing and incentives, we got to figure out a way to implement that with the chaos that exists in reality. And it was really well said yesterday. We've spent a great amount of time discussing the science of these tools. We have not discussed the science of implementing them. And that's the part we got to get to. And I know my colleagues nationwide are very encouraged and engaged in this dialogue. They want to know more about this, but they're ignorant, and they'll admit that part. I started off with why. So I saw this slide last week. I stole it from Alltech. They presented this to us, and this is the why. If we look at food production from a global perspective, we cannot do it with plants. It's great. Plants are a key part of our diet. They're not going anywhere. But from an amino acid perspective, animal protein, animal products are going to be part of the human diet worldwide. And we really need to keep that in focus of keeping our clients in business. And that's what we get to do every day. Our clients are engaged in this conversation. They very much want to be a part of the solution. They're willing to adopt new technologies as long as they're done in a safe and healthy manner for their customer, who they do view as the consumer at the retail end, along with their cows. They're not going to sacrifice their animals for any business because that's their business. The other part I wanted to bring up is California's cow herd has been a part of sustainability and recycling forever. And when my colleagues on the East Coast talk about byproducts, they discuss corn gluten, which to us is a staple. I fed asparagus silage, pomegranate pumice, carrot fines, you name it, and we've tried it in this state because it exists for some period of time. We were talking about diets on dairies earlier a little bit, and I did the math on one client. Over the last 13 years, on average, I've changed his diet 46 times. It's almost once a week. That's one herd. And that happens for everybody out there. So how we execute these products in reality and how ingredient, diet variability, lab variability, modeling all impacts the execution is unknown. We don't know where we go with these things. There's to be some great products, and we've seen some research on what happens when you feed seaweed as an example. But how does that play with broccoli silage? We have no idea. And I don't know if we ever will, but we need to understand that's a reality that exists out in the marketplace. And so as we roll forward with this conversation of how we do it, we need to figure out tools that are efficiently being executed and get them there fast. Dairymen do want solutions, but if they stay, we got, 7 years left? We're almost halfway through this one till we get to our end goal. That's a short amount of time when you look at regulation, and we got to find products and tools that we can measure in the field. And I do believe if we're going to take research dollars from the taxpayer, who is the consumer on the other end, we need to get those products and make them open source so that we get a free market that drives the cost of those down so they get more ubiquitous implementation. And then lastly, and we talked about this some with insets and offsets, it's got to be either cost neutral or profitable, and the dairymen will accept it. They're not hesitant, but if we look at what's happened over the last 5 years on the dairy market, we've gone from as low during COVID of $9 per hundredweight to some dairies, while the neighbor got $25, which $9 is half of the cost of production, to right now we're at a market where it's break even on its best. And my feed bill is $200 million, and that's just my clients. The economics are very draining. This is a 30-year investment every dairyman makes. They're not going anywhere. It's a long-term generational investment on the dairies, and we have to make sure that their viability stays there financially. With that, that's all I have.
Okay, I'm gonna ask a few questions to him, and then we'll get to you guys, because I'm sure you guys have some questions too. So the first question is, recently FDA held a listening session regarding products with environmental claims. Where are we in the process? I know Holly mentioned there's some language in front of Congress that she had put out. And then I'll refer to maybe Holly, Dave, Leah, on where federally you guys are on the changes to that. You want to start, Dave?
Everybody's looking at me. I'm not sure what's going on. So, no, appreciate that and appreciate the opportunity to have that public feedback at that listening session we had here recently. Holly, I think, covered a lot of the points there on that listening session really well. We did get comments from the public. We are looking through the comments from there. We have been, as Leah mentioned too, they had come talk to us a couple times at least, and others have come talk to us about changes they'd like to see in the regulatory system. And so we've been addressing that with all of our scientists that are our subject matter experts, as well as our regulatory councils, our legal folks, to make sure that any changes that we'd have would still follow the law. Obviously, that's a good thing for a federal agency to do. And so that's in the process of doing that. I think what you've seen to date, Holly presented as far as language and what is out there is a result of some of those discussions. We've worked under the paradigm since 1998 of where things are regulatorily for foods and drugs, and so there's a lot of deep-seated thoughts about those, and so we had to work through a lot of those discussions. So over the last couple of years, we've talked about that. So I think we've had the listening session, we've had comments from that, we're looking through comments. There's been legislative language that's been proposed, and then we'll also need to come out with some guidance. Legislative language isn't intended to provide every specific detail. It isn't intended to provide all of the thinking. It's intended to provide the direction that Congress wants us to go. And so in order to kind of flesh that out, I think there'll be guidance that will come out as well that will talk to where we are on some of these things. And so that's another piece that from all of our discussions we've had the opportunity to think about, and hopefully that can come soon after that.
Anything to add? You guys good? Okay. All right. I think we kind of answered this question, but I'm going to ask it again, just so we can repeat the same thing over and over to you guys. But why is it essential for companies to seek federal approval for feed additives with environmental claims over going state by state?
So I'll start with that one. And then I know Jenna has some comments too. From a perspective of a feed company that does business across state lines, right? So right now we're regulated at the state level and the federal level. And we have 49 states that have feed programs, Alaska being the one that doesn't have an active feed program. So we have situations right now where we have state-by-state approvals of hemp products and a couple other ingredients, and it makes it very difficult for companies to do business across state lines. When you have customers asking for products and it's not approved, we have difficulties where products have received even a tentative definition from AFCO, and some states won't allow it. So it's important for us to have that harmonized system so that business can happen, and it doesn't become a situation where it's almost like cherry picking, right? Going to a state where you can get something and then others can't, and it's just not fair to our producers to put them in that same spot either.
Thank you, Leah. I would kind of echo that. I think that what's really important in what you're seeing here is, there needs to be synergy and collaboration between programs, even within the states. And so I might, in the feed program or our livestock drugs program, deem a product as safe with our team and have a very narrow approval, but that might not be acceptable for the livestock drugs and the federal milk marketing ordinance that, Dr. Beam talked about. So just because we think a product is safe in our side, on the feed side, doesn't mean that it's acceptable for producers to use for their milk. And so it all works together. And so from farm to table, to Dr. Beam's point, you cannot, silo this. It needs to all work together and be synergistic. And so, again, that's why a federal approval is critical and really the key to a path forward for these products.
Yeah, is it working now? I'm pushing really hard. Wow. Going? No? Oh, it's finally going. All right. So I was just going to add that, the principle of uniformity nationally is critical, and I agree with everything that was just said on that point. And it extends to the actual products themselves. It extends to the finished products, whether it's bottled pasteurized milk, or whether it's yogurt or cottage cheese or anything else. It's important that all the states are following the same rules because they move in interstate commerce. And the way that food safety regulations work now and requirements and standards, we know that if we have, say, yogurt coming from New York, it's held to the same safety standards as the yogurt that's manufactured and produced here in California. And that is vital that we have that uniformity. And the food safety standards from a policy standpoint, that resides within FDA's Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition. So CIFSAN is the one that works with the conference to make sure, the national conference and the PMO, to make sure all these standards make sense scientifically along with the states. But they look to FDA CVM with respect to what's an approved drug or what's an approved additive for an animal food. So they defer to FDA CVM. So even within FDA, it's vital that, there's one source or one location where all this is reviewed and approved, and then it all works much more smoothly. I'm half tempted just to keep holding this button while I sit here. But.
So he can answer the next question. Okay, so I have one more question, and then we'll go to audience questions. What is the biggest challenge feed additives face in the approval process and for large-scale implementation? Ooh, that's a tough one. Who wants to take that one first?
I mean, right now, I would say it's having a pathway that is achievable for these products. And so if we can get that solved, then I think it's making sure that the data is there to prove what FDA needs to make the to get you to the yes, right, to get it to market. And so making sure that the submissions are complete, that you have all of the data, that you utilize the pre-consultation process that they have to talk to them early and often. We talked a lot about research here these last 2 days, but making sure that you're thinking about in those research studies that this data might be used for regulatory approval. And I don't think that happens a lot in some of those studies, but be thinking and conscious about how that data could be used to help get this product to market early on in your conversations, help save money, and hopefully help save time in the long run through the review process.
I think I'll jump in real quick. I think the regulatory pathway, to Leah's point, is a very important piece. I also think another challenge and something that is spinning in my head is the coordination between not only the regulatory approval but the protocols and the coordination that that's going to take in order for these products to count as reductions. We all need to work together to make sure that coordination is happening in unison. Otherwise, our regulatory approvals are not going to do any good on the other side. So, for the purpose, the intended purpose of this. So, I'm kind of flying off the cuff here, but I think that coordination is going to be a challenge. It's definitely a challenge we're all willing to take on, but we have to acknowledge it.
Testing, 1, 2. I got the bad microphone here. I was just going to add that, we've heard a lot about how complex this is and how complicated it is, how many variables are involved. And Jed was describing how often he has to change rations with various ingredients. And so there's a lot of variability that we're going to have in this system. And typically, experimentally, you deal with variability with increasing numbers. And so we're going to need to have a way to have larger practical studies, and we don't have enough research institutions with animals to deal with it. So we're going to have food use authorizations that allow us to conduct these trials in practical settings where we don't have to dispose of milk. We can still do it in a safe way and have protocols that will kind of kill two birds with one stone, that they're going to look at efficacy, but while you're doing it at the same time, get that safety data that you need for that approval as well, so that we're doing this really efficiently. We don't want to have to do, multiple studies in order to answer FDA's questions. We want to be able to do it much more efficiently, I think, especially given the time and the cost and the energy this is going to take.
The last part, I might have the bad mic too. The last part of the approval process that gets overlooked is the one where we saw failure on BST's marketing, and it's gone from the market. I'd hate to see a technology develop to this great conversation we've had the last day and a half, get all the way to application, and then have the open market decide it's not applicable, because that's possible. So we really have to get the consumer on board from the beginning.
Anybody have anything else? If not, does anybody have any questions in the audience? I know we only have a few minutes left because, oh, wow, okay. Well, he was first this time. Sorry, Juan. He was first. Then you get to go.
Thank you all for all your wisdom and comments. Just following on from what you just said then, Jed, about BST, if you look at synthetic bio and how that is revolutionising pharma and human health, there's a good chance that there could be some uses in this space. Where is that on the radar for all of you in terms of pharma acceptance, consumer acceptance, safety, efficacy, and also the regulatory process?
I can speak from the farmer side. From altering the microbiome, adapting it, adding to it, we're open. The farmer as a consumer is open to that technology. But like I said, if their processor won't accept it, it's off the table. We cannot, we have a growing market when you look at dairy protein and dairy products. Milk market, different conversation. But we don't want to shrink it by any means. And the last thing, we've been through this, we'd want to do is scare them away again.
I think to add to that, from a CDFA standpoint, our mission at CDFA is to promote and protect agriculture and our California products. And so that's something that needs to be top of mind as we look, to consumer acceptance. And that's something that we will have in top of mind because it is a mission for the department.
Waiting.
Oh, Sammy,
Yep.
Juan was first, but I
No,
think
he
Dr.
wasn't.
Green-
I was way quicker than Juan.
Oh,
I hit the button.
sorry.
Couple things that you guys brought up that are a little concerning is you talk about interstate commerce and fairness. Explain to me Prop 2. So I have not a whole lot of faith that California will be fair to its producers, who I have to deal with, when it comes to some of these new regulations or circumventing the FDA and the federal regulations. So the start of that is, what gives methane the right to circumvent and create new policies when we've been begging for new antibiotics in the space for 20 years? That's the first half. So I would love to hear from the EDF and from the industry panel people to say why is this so important when CARB has yet to set a date? We don't even know when the baseline's coming. So to hurry up and get this stuff through, I have concerns with food safety and everything else. And it won't be fair if California sets a standard and the FDA does not.
From a feed industry perspective, right? I mean, we're not trying to rush anything, but we want to be able to have products on the market so that producers can use them to meet the goals that are either being set for them or that they have set for themselves. And whether that's for improving production, right? Or food safety, the environment, animal nutrition as a whole, we want to be able to bring those products to market so that our customers can use them. And so we're not looking to circumvent or speed things up or give one thing more priority than another. We need those approval processes to work. And that's right, one of the struggles that we've had and we continue to work with. And Dave and I talk constantly, and he hears from me constantly because that is one of our biggest things. And our industry, I can tell you that I have member companies that are not bringing products to the United States because they cannot get them approved here. So they're not even bringing them available for you as a dairy producer to use because they cannot see a path forward to get it approved in the United States. And that's not the situation that our country should be in, right?
I think from the federal regulatory aspect too, that, you know, when we are looking at these different substances, we're obviously looking at safety, and we're looking at safety from several different aspects, and that's it. I mean, that's kind of where we're going to be. We are hoping that people bring us innovations, that we can look at them and we can help them get to a process, to a place where those things are approved so that we can have those technologies out there for industry to use. I didn't mention it on there, but after we do our reviews and we get things done, we have a party just like the firm does because we're excited about getting those things done too, right? We have cake, we have people get together, and we celebrate the ability to have those things approved and out there and on the market because it's important to us too.
Okay, now it's on. Thank you. I think my question is fairly straightforward. First of all, I appreciate all the panel perspective. Obviously, as I alluded to yesterday in the panel I participated, one of the findings, well, the number one insight that we find on this exercise of looking for a wish list for feed additive guidance was that safety is non-negotiable, right? And so the question that I have is this guidance that was alluded to that's coming, will it have spelled out criteria for studies that are required in order for an additive to be considered safe? For example, is there going to be a requirement for testing it in a commercial farm over a lactation and a half? Or that's just an example. I could spew out a few other examples. I'll leave it there.
So I'll start with that one. And so I appreciate the want and the need for people to have certainty as far as what they're doing and what they're running. And in the U.S. regulatory system, we do provide guidance, but we also, at the top of guidance is we also say this isn't the only way you can do it. If you can find another way to do it and achieve the same goals, then you can come to us. In spaces like this that we're kind of in new areas, I would say, you know, we try to work with folks to be able to do that. But it's really a matter of people bringing data and information to us. You know, we don't generate the data ourselves, right? So we're not the ones running the trials and those sorts of things. We do have a pretty good sense of what data would be good for us to see, but that's easiest if we have conversations where people come and talk to us about those things. I think there are other jurisdictions around the world that have very much a checklist. You do X, Y, and Z, and you get to the end. In the U.S., we tend to have heard from industry and others that they want more flexibility than that. They want to be able to run their own studies and do those things. So we have end goals that we have, but we don't have X, Y, and Z that you have to do necessarily. And so that has its pros, it has its cons, and I know a lot of the times people want both flexibility and a checklist, and those things are a little tough to balance with one another. But we will work with folks to make sure that before you run that study that you are coming up with outcomes that would be able to meet that. And I think that's kind of our promise.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave. Appreciate that. I think you're going to be getting a lot of emails after this
Hello.
panel, but we had a question over here.
Thank you very much. My name is Femi. I just want to ask this question about ease of doing business for farmers, because as we're talking about feed additives, I'm just thinking about the farmer out there, because I believe one of the speakers spoke about Texas having big farmers coming up and reducing the contribution of California dairy farm to the national grid. And I'm not thinking basically if doing business or starting a farm in California will be kind of difficult because of the rules and regulation around additives, because FDA and CDFA are not in tandem, so to say, at this stage. Won't it encourage more farmers to go out of California and do business out there, since you said most of the products still find their way back into the States? And won't it also have effect on the cost of doing business for people who are doing their business here in California? Because if I can do it better outside the state, then, and I can send my product down to the state, then I think it will be a good idea for me. Thank you.
You may not get lunch before. Oh, it's working. Okay. So the feed additive, food additive approval, drug approval, I'll call it a challenge or dilemma, if you will, extends across the entire United States. So there really wouldn't be a scenario where a dairy producer would be at an advantage to move to, say, another state to be able to more freely use a food additive for enteric emission reduction, unless FDA defers all those approvals to state-by-state kind of approach, which we obviously are advocating that not be the case. That what you're saying, emphasizes the importance of having that central approval to where it's going to be covered nationally, approval or disapproval, as the case may be. In terms of challenges of starting dairy farms, I think that extends more into other types of regulation in California that might make it more hard than other states. I've been chief, since 2004, and I've personally seen close to 900 dairy farms disappear in California during my time. That's 900 dairy producing families. The cows have not gone away to that extent, but it's still an impact. And there's lots of reasons for that, which I won't get into, but how farms are regulated is part of that. This is yet another challenge upon the industry here in our state, because our state does tend to lean forward with respect to environmental regulation and concerns. So it's just one more of those things that we have to work hard together to try and address.
The only thing I'll add to that is, if you looked at the slides yesterday showing that Nestle, McDonald's, Starbucks are all pushing this from their perspective, they're global companies. So this may start in California, but everybody's watching because it will impact them and be an opportunity for them. If you view it only as a negative, as a cost, then it's just what it is. But there's a lot of opportunity in this for the producer, the supply chain, and the end user to benefit from this activity.